Okay, so I'm going to go straight into it. I did see Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen. Great fight. The better man won that night, and that's the way I see it. But I actually really want to talk about something else that I said I would talk about a while ago. And I've always promised this, and I want to keep my word. And I want to talk about Quinton Rampage Jackson and his time in the UFC and where it kind of is going right now. And there seems to be a lot of opinions on this and a lot of discussion about this, so I want to chime in and give my 2 cents on it as a fan. There's 2 ways of looking at it, and one thing I will say is that if you're a fan of Rampage Jackson and you've studied the history of his career, you'll notice that he's had a very, very, very long fight career. He's fought for many years before he was even in the UFC, when he was fighting, in Pride, when he used to fight on local shows, when he fought in the WFA after Pride. And one of the things you'll notice with him, if you're on his side of it, is that he's had very unusual relationships with the promoters, meaning there always seems to be some conflict between him and the promoters, and it always kind of leads to him going off in a huff and leaving. And I always remember back in the day when there was a Pride and there was a UFC, that Jackson was very content fighting in Japan. He never really wanted to fight in the UFC. And I've heard him in interviews even say that he wasn't really an MMA fan or a UFC fan, he just fell into it. And he was never, pushing to go to the UFC because his friend Tito Ortiz was there at the time, and that was one of the many reasons. And I've also heard way back that he was actually considering being a pro wrestler instead, but we'll go forward. Anyways, so I want to talk specifically about his time in the UFC, and there's going to be some controversial things I might say, so feel free to call me out on them if you think they are. Anyways, so when Jackson eventually was signed to the UFC, or had his contract bought out from the WFA, I believe, to the UFC, he was immediately being touted to fight Chuck Liddell, but he fought Marvin Eastman first, a guy that he lost his first professional fight to. It was a solid fight, it wasn't the slams and all the dynamicism that you usually see with Rampage, and then he was thrust into a rematch with Chuck Liddell from their Pride fight. So Rampage goes and beats Chuck Liddell, and I knew in my heart when they announced this fight the second time that Rampage would do Liddell over even worse than he did the first time. And sure enough, he did. He won the title. And then we fast forward to the unification match with Dan Henderson, and this is kind of where I think some of the problems began. Now, on his side, he probably felt dissed because the unification bout wasn't promoted as this big grand fight. That's because, in my opinion, the promoters wanted to have Chuck Liddell versus Wanderlei Silva for the titles, not Jackson and Henderson. So in a way, they kind of wound up promoting a fight that they didn't want. So they had this fight in the UK, and Rampage wins the fight. It was a great fight to watch, a great chess match of a fight. In my opinion, that's the best I've seen Jackson look in the UFC in terms of cardio, in terms of wrestling defense, in terms of striking. It was the best he looked. He really came out there, and he really just put some time and effort, and you could see it there. And that's where I think the decline began, because after that fight, in my opinion, he kind of became too comfortable, and he always blames the UFC for the next thing I'm about to talk about, and that's the Forrest Griffin fight. And he's always blaming the UFC, and every interview I've heard him do where he talks about that fight, he's, the UFC killed my love for the fighting business when with that Forrest Griffin thing, it was their fault. And I want to kind of think that it wasn't their fault, because in my opinion, after the Henderson fight, to quote a man I really dislike, Lil Wayne, he got too comfortable. He stopped training. He got very out of shape. I think he even said that he took 9 months off of training, before the Forrest Griffin fight. And I remember watching the press and the interviews and looking at the two of them, and physically, Forrest kind of looked the same, whereas Jackson, you could tell, hadn't been training, and he looked a bit out of sorts and out of shape. And then when the Ultimate Fighter kicked in, he didn't look too good in that season. And I just knew then that Forrest was going to win the fight, and I had a feeling he was going to win by decision. And sure enough, people disagreed with me. This was before I had a channel. People said, no, it's not going to happen. Rampage is going to knock him out. Rampage did interviews saying, Forrest is the perfect opponent for me to take 9 months off. It's not like I'm fighting Shogun or Vanderlei or Chuck. And that right there are certain things people say in interviews that are trash talk and hype talk to hype a fight. And there are certain things that people say that they mean, and you know they mean them because you see their actions, and their actions if their actions are reflecting their words, it kind of tells you how they really view this thing. So when I saw Rampage looking all out of shape and then basically training 6 weeks before the fight date, I just knew that Forrest was going to beat him. Forrest had been training, Forrest had been working, and the fight happens. It was a very, very close fight, and I still believe, even though I do like Rampage, I still believe that Forrest beat him by a very close decision. But I knew that Forrest had won the fight, and it was hard. It was like a bittersweet moment because I really like Rampage, but it was just one of those strange nights for me. And then we go on to the next thing, and he's always, talking about, how badly the UFC treat him, and of course, there was that incident with Rampage not long afterwards where he kind of went on this, for lack of a better word, rampage in his monster truck and caused some harm and really just was out of sorts. And the UFC really stood by his side, in my opinion, publicly at least. They showed some support for their fighter. They didn't go off and say, just leave him to it, and they didn't go off and release him, because around the same time Jesse Taylor had done something like that and they cut him, whereas they kept Rampage and they supported him publicly, and Dana was very, very supportive of him. And then it looked like Rampage had been humbled by some of the experiences, and he looked like he was taking things seriously again. He fights Vanderlei, moves over to England, trains, fights Vanderlei, and I was really pleased to see him kind of come back again. He beats Vanderlei after that great trilogy of fights. There was the third fight of their trilogy. Has a great fight with Vanderlei. Well, he had 2 great fights, then he knocks him out in the third fight. And it looked like Rampage was back on track, and then the Keith Jardine thing happened. He fought Keith Jardine, which led to him versus Rashad Evans. And I was really looking forward to that fight. They had that infamous stare down, really just got me pumped up. And it was this great big year-long feud. We waited a year for the fight. So many things were said, so many personal things between the two were said. And it was like, it gave me those chills I got when Rock and Austin had their WrestleMania match. It had that heat to it. Something that Cena and Rock lacked, but we'll get onto that another time. And as they did the Ultimate Fighter, things were progressing. And again, I was listening to Rampage and the things he was saying. And I was looking at Rashad and listening to the things Rashad was saying. And again, I started to get that horrible feeling. Rampage doesn't take Rashad Evans seriously. And Rashad is taking him seriously. Rashad is clearly keeping himself in shape, working on the game plan. You can tell he's studying him. Whereas I can tell that Rampage isn't taking him seriously. And then he, of course, goes off, claims he's going to retire, has a fallout with the UFC again, puts on about 50 pounds while filming the A-Team film, and then he eventually works his way back. Well, it doesn't work his way back, and it's announced that he's going back to the UFC and he's going to fight Rashad Evans. And I looked at Rampage and I said, how on earth is he going to get all that weight off, get in shape, and not show any signs of rust in this fight against Rashad Evans? And I mean, I was excited to see the fight, but I knew that Rashad was going to win. And when I saw Rashad versus Thiago Silva, it confirmed to me what the game plan was going to be. Rashad moving in and out, doing some work. When he starts to recover, pull out, take him back down again. And it was pretty much that fight. And unfortunately, again, Rampage, I mean, it was a great heated fight, one of the most well-promoted fights in UFC history. And again, Rampage didn't live up to the expectations that he has, that fans have of him. And then when he fought Lyoto Machida, he seemed to be taking him seriously, and he wins that fight just about. And then he fights Matt Hamill, and I don't think he took Hamill seriously. And then we fast forward to the John Jones fight, and the John Jones fight was another thing, because I've always compared the two for a number of reasons. Because a lot of John Jones reminds... Let me rephrase this. John Jones reminds me a lot of the early Quinton Rampage Jackson, a very dynamic fighter, you know, throwing things around, doing things that you don't normally see. But I feel that John Jones became the more finely tuned of the two. And when he got to a certain point, he didn't kind of stop and say, well, I'm going to stop right there. He carried on progressing and carried on developing his skills and all areas of the game. Whereas now, Rampage really is a guy that is just wrestling, defense and boxing. And it's starting to show now, where when he fought John Jones, he was completely outclassed by the guy. Although I will say that Jones didn't completely overwhelm him or destroy him like he did Shogun, and I thought that was impressive. He moved his head well and he did stuff some of his takedowns. But you can't help but think, man, if Rampage trained more effectively and trained smarter and took the last 2 years of his UFC run a lot more seriously, I think that fight would have been very, very different. And, you know, unfortunately it wasn't. And now we fast forward to him fighting Ryan Bader, and there was some problems then, you know, the TRT and the knee injury. And then after that, Rampage started talking again. He started talking about the UFC and, oh, fuck these fans, they don't know what they're talking about, fuck these fighters, no one wants to fight me in the UFC treat me like crap, you fight cheap, I'll make more money in boxing, I'm going to have a Hollywood career, I'm leaving the UFC can kiss my ass. And a lot of this now is starting to remind me of Tito and Dana, this Rampage situation. And if Rampage thinks he's going to make more money in boxing in the long run, I don't think he will. I know enough about the boxing pay scale. I know enough about boxing, and I know people who work in the promotional aspect of boxing. And I can imagine for the first fight, because of the curiosity factor, he would make a fair bit of money. But in the long run, he would make more money fighting in the UFC than he would going over into boxing. As far as films, I mean, who knows? I mean, he could do some films. He's a charismatic guy, but this is a guy that can be very wish-washy, and if he didn't like the way he was treated in the UFC, I guarantee you in Hollywood there are going to be producers that are not going to sugarcoat or mince their words to him when they didn't like something he did. And that seems to be the main problem now with him in the UFC. Anytime something gets said, he takes it very personal. The Joe Rogan situation is a great example. I don't think Rogan, I mean, he gets a lot of flack, Rogan. I don't think Rogan was as bad as people think in what he said. I think he gave interesting insight or criticism to Rampage, and Rampage took it very, very personally and got very, very upset with him. And I think that seems to be the problem. Rampage seems to be a guy that, I mean, sorry to say it, has to have yes men. And I mean, we're all guilty of having yes men. We all want people to tell us the things that we want to hear. But really in life and in fighting, you need people that are going to look at you precisely and say, well, actually, no, I don't agree with this. You need to work on this. And allegedly that was the situation with him and one of his coaches, Lance Gibson, who wanted to work on certain things, and Rampage's management didn't like it, so they axed him. And it just makes me wonder now what's going to happen with Rampage. I mean, I really like the guy. He's a funny guy, although sometimes he can come across like an arrogant bully. If you watch season 10 of The Ultimate Fighter, you'll know what I mean. And there are times when he can come off as a bit too superstarred, you know, getting a bit big-headed, comes very arrogant, and then it's hard to warm to him. But there's a nice side to him as well, and who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what's going to happen now with Rampage? And I'm going to kind of wrap it up right now because there's a lot of noise going on downstairs. I don't know why they do that when I'm doing a video. And write your comments. Let me know what you think of the Rampage, Jackson and UFC relationship. If you disagree or you feel the same way, feel free to write anything you want. except racial slurs, God forbid. And let me know what you think. He's going to be fighting again soon, and I can't remember, well, I can't pronounce the guy's name, but let me know what you think's going to happen. Do we think that Rampage is going to be completely done with the UFC, or is it eventually going to get worked out, or is it going to be a thing where he says he's leaving and then he signs for another 4 fights and then we have the same problem? Let me know what you think, and I'll just wrap it up by saying this. I am a fan of Rampage Jackson. I have high expectations for him. I haven't seen a guy with those kind of natural gifts and skills for fighting. Not just that he can be a great fighter, but he can have entertaining fights and he can draw a crowd. And I think that when he wants to and he puts his mind to it, he can do anything he wants to in the world of fighting or in the world. And that's just my opinion on him. So I'm going to stop, write some comments. I'm going to do another video in a few minutes, and it's nice to be back. Take care.